boys and girls, it's Miss Charlotte. I know we haven't been at CCC for a while, but I wanted everyone to know that we're thinking about you and all the teachers miss you very much. I thought we'd do something special, and we're going to try and see if we can get some different people from the building to share some stories and messages with you that'll be posted on the webpage that your mom and dad can help you find. So I thought I'd go ahead and start it out with reading my favorite story. It was my favorite when I was little, but I've used it so much I don't have the front cover anymore. And it's called Mouse Cafe, and it was by Patricia Coombs. She was the writer and the illustrator, so I don't know if you can see that. There we go. I guess that's the better way to do it. And so I'm going to go ahead and start the story, and tell me if it reminds you of a Disney princess maybe that you think has sort of something similar happen to her. It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a little mouse named Lollymops. She lived with her tired old mother and her two mean sisters in a hole under the closet. The Mops family was very poor. Lollymops worked all day long while Mother Mops looked for crumbs to feed her family. There's Lollymops working. Lollymops swept and scrubbed and ironed and mended and cooked crumb soup. The two sisters were very lazy. They were lazy and very, very mean. They sat around all day and curled their hair and painted their nails and quarreled. Do you remember what quarreled means? That's sort of a fancy word for when they argue with each other. The sisters would drink up all the crumb soup that Lollymops would make and then make her wash the dishes. So there you can see Lollymops doing all her jobs and the two sisters just sitting there taking care of themselves. Or any of you helping do jobs around the house with your mom and dad? Anyway, Lollymops was busy, and she worked and she would work, and she really didn't complain about it. She just sighed a little bit and she tried to smile. Everybody give me a really big smile. Cheese! Lollymops loved her tired old mother. She even loved her mean sisters. She wanted everyone to be happy. But soon Lollymops was too thin to smile, and she was too tired, and she fell asleep mopping the floor. The two mean sisters yelled at Lollymops, "Bring us our crumb soup. We're not going to wait a minute longer." But Lollymops did not hear them. She was too sound asleep, with one paw hanging into the bucket of mop water. "Well," yelled the two mean sisters, "of course, of all the lazy, good-for-nothing creatures, we've put up with you long enough." Can you see her? She fell asleep there in her bucket of bubbles. And with that, they picked Lollymops up and they threw her out the hole and slammed the door shut. Lollymops opened her eyes. It was snowing. It was dark and cold, and she shivered in her wet, ragged dress as she crawled through the snow behind the garbage cans. Can you see her? There she is. She crawled along and she crawled along. Her little pink paws were cold, and her little pink feet were cold, and the end of her nose was getting redder and redder. Everybody go ahead and point to your nose. Mine's right here. At last, Lollymops saw a crack of light under a door. There was a sign on the door. "Help wanted," said the sign. Lollymops leaned against the door and sneezed. Just then the door opened and Lollymops fell inside on the floor and fainted. A fat, kind mouse in a white apron fed Lollymops a bowl of warm soup. She wrapped her up in a big towel. So there's Lollymops finding the door with the help wanted sign and meeting the fat old mouse that was kind to her. As soon as Lollymops felt better, she told the kind mouse, whose name was Ella, everything that had happened to her. And it was so sad, Ella and Lollymops both cried. Ella wiped away their tears with the corner of her apron. "I need another waitress," said Ella. "You will be happy here at Mouse Cafe. You will have lots of good food to eat and a warm place to sleep." The next day, Lollymops put on a checkered dress, a white apron, and a cap. "Oh, what beautiful clothes," she said when she saw herself in the mirror. There she is getting dressed for work. That's kind of like her uniform. You're going to see some of the other mice are going to be in that too at the restaurant. The other waitresses, though, laughed at her. They said mean things. The other mice hated the checkered dresses and the white aprons. They did not like to work. They wanted to marry mice with big shiny cars and sit around in pink fancy gowns with pearls and fur coats and shiny slippers with pointed toes. They said Lollymops was dumb because she was happy and smiled as she wrote down her orders and poured coffee and set the tables and propped up the menus. The other mice played tricks on Lollymops. They put sugar in the salt and salt in the sugar, hoping that Ella would get mad and send Lollymops away. But Ella knew their tricks, and she did not blame Lollymops at all. There you go. There's the other waitresses being unkind. Every night at 12 o'clock, a handsome mouse named Mr. Hodges came into the cafe for supper. There he is. Can you see him walking in the door? He has sort of a fancy top hat on right here. Every night, all the mouse waitresses argued over whose turn it was to take care of Mr. Hodges' table. They made Lollymops stay out in the kitchen because she was prettier than any of them, and they did not want Mr. Hodges to see her. Lollymops peeked through the door and sighed. Mr. Hodges looked so kind and so handsome. She dreamed about serving Mr. Hodges his soup and lighting the candle on the table for him. What do you think's going to happen to Lollymops? Do you think she'll get a chance to be able to serve him dinner? I don't know. Right now she's stuck in the kitchen. One night, as Mr. Hodges came into the cafe, the waitresses started arguing about whose turn it was to serve him, and Ella told them to be quiet or she would throw them out into the snow. Now, said Ella, Lollymops has not had a turn. Tonight she will serve Mr. Hodges. There she is telling all the waitresses to stop fighting and that Lollymops is going to get a chance to take his order. Oh me, oh my, whispered Lollymops. What if I do something wrong and Mr. Hodges never comes back to Mouse Cafe? Ella smiled. Nonsense, my dear. You will do a good job. Don't worry. Have you ever been worried about a job you needed to do? Let's see how Lollymops does. She hurried over to Mr. Hodges' table. Her paws were trembling as she lit the candle. She nearly scorched Mr. Hodges' whiskers. That means she almost burnt them with the flame from the candle. Mr. Hodges looked at Lollymops, and he smiled. You are new here, aren't you? He said. Yes, sir, said Lollymops. No, sir. I'm not sure, sir, said Lollymops, turning very pink. She was blushing because she was kind of embarrassed. Mr. Hodges laughed in a very kind way and dampened his whiskers with a corner of his napkin. Well, said Mr. Hodges, tonight I will have noodle and crumb soup, salad and a cheese sandwich, coffee later, and perhaps pie. Lollymops wrote down his order and hurried into the kitchen. So there she is. She's helping him at the table. And she's heading into the kitchen. The other mouse waitresses had been watching Mr. Hodges and Lollymops. Mr. Hodges had never smiled at them like that. Uh-oh, do you think they're going to be jealous? Let's see. I'll fix her, muttered one of the mice. You just watch me. She'll never wait on his table again. The mouse hid behind the door, and when Lollymops picked up the bowl of noodles and crumb soup, hurried back out the door, the mouse followed her. Just as Lollymops was about to serve the bowl of soup to Mr. Hodges, the mouse stood on Lollymops' tail. Eee! Squealed Lollymops. But it was too late. The bowl of soup sailed into the air and came down with a splat on Mr. Hodges' head. So there she is. She's getting stepped on and the bowl's falling out of her hands and it lands on Mr. Hodges' head. Eee! Squealed Mr. Hodges as he jumped to his feet. Lollymops was kneeling on the floor trying to wipe the soup off his shoes with her apron. She was crying so hard she was getting his socks wet. There you go. Can you see that? There he is with the bowl of soup on his head. The chair fell over and she's trying to help clean him up. Mr. Hodges lifted Lollymops off the floor. "Don't cry," said Mr. Hodges. "Please don't cry over spilled soup. You are beautiful. You were meant to wear pink satin gowns and pearls and fur coats and slippers with pointy toes." Lollymops blushed and cried even harder. "I'm only a poor clumsy mouse," she sniffed. "I'm sorry I spilled soup and nearly scorched your whiskers. I'll go away and never come back." There she is, all sad. What do you think happens to her? Do you think he's going to be mad at her? Or do you think he's going to forgive her for spilling the soup? Let's see. "Nonsense," cried Mr. Hodges, taking the bowl off his head and shaking the noodles out of his nose and hair. "You must never leave me. Until I met you, my life was dull and humdrum, pretty boring. We will get up and I will marry you tomorrow. You will never have to ladle soup again, or set tables, or wear aprons." "Ooh, I must be dreaming," squeaked Lollymops, and she started to faint. "Don't faint," cried Mr. Hodges. "I love you, Lollymops." There he is, catching her. "I have dreamed about you since I first saw you through a hole in the door," whispered Lollymops, and she didn't faint. Instead, Lollymops and Mr. Hodges had their cheese sandwiches and soup together in the kitchen with Ella. There they are eating. The next day, Lollymops and Mr. Hodges had a lovely wedding. Lollymops wore a white gown with lots and lots of lace and a white veil. Mr. Hodges bought satin gowns for all of the mice from Mouse Cafe, and pearls and slippers with pointed toes. And he even gave Ella a fur cape and pearl earrings. So there she is, she's getting married, and all the other mice are there watching. Lollymops and Mr. Hodges lived in a big house with fancy chairs and flower pots, and every Saturday they took Lollymops' mother for a drive in Mr. Hodges' car. Then they all had dinner at Mouse Cafe. You see their fancy chairs and their flowers in the car that they would take. We're getting close to the end. What do you think is going to happen to Lollymops? They were very happy together. Soon they had an armful of baby mice, and Lollymops made their beds and sewed on their buttons. She sang songs to them, and she cooked them soup. She became a mommy, and she stayed at home taking care of them, just like all of us are at home, and we have people at the house taking care of us right now. She told them bedtime stories every night. When Mr. Hodges tucked them in under their covers, there they are getting ready to go to bed. They're getting tucked in, and she's getting ready to leave the door as they all go to sleep. And guess what? They all lived happily ever after. So I hope you loved my story about Lollymops the mouse. Did it remind you of a Disney princess? When I was little, it reminded me of the story of Cinderella, and how there were people who weren't very nice to her, and how she had to work really hard, and she got a chance to go someplace very special to meet people who loved her and took care of her and wanted to be around her, so that she lived happily ever after. So I hope you enjoyed my story, and it made you think about the story of Cinderella too. Maybe that's one that you've heard or you watched on the TV in a movie or with mom or dad or someone. Anyway, I'm going to say goodbye for right now, and I'm going to try and find another teacher at CCC that will record a video and send it out so that we can post it for all of you to view. Take care. I hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you soon back at CCC. Bye, everybody.